Why is it that when I get up here, everybody leaves? Or almost everybody. Thank you for staying. The good news is that since there's fewer of us, everybody gets to talk more. So let's bow our heads and we'll have a prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you that you have brought us to this day. We thank you that we're seeing a little promise of spring. We know we still can have some significant weather, but we're looking forward to warmth, and thank you that we have a warm place where we can worship you. In Jesus' name, amen. You know, sometimes some people think that if their wife says it, they have to agree with it. Or if their husband says it, they have to agree with it. Or if a Christian says it, they have to agree with it. And it may help to get along if you just agree. But we don't really want to be people who passively agree with error. And often Christians say some things that are pretty stupid. And I've said this before, one of the things that I heard repeatedly when I was a kid is the Bible is such a simple book that even a child can understand it. And I knew there was something wrong with that as a kid even. And I've come to realize it's really a stupid saying because the Bible is a very difficult book to understand in many places. That's why we discuss it. There's no point of discussing things that are simple to understand. 2 + 1 = 3. How much discussion are we going to have on that truth? Very little. It's simply stated and accepted, and we're not going to have much discussion. So the fact that we can discuss the Bible indicates that there are some very deep things in there and some very difficult things to understand. Some people, in studying the Bible, come up with what they call proof texts, and they're texts that they just pull out from here, and they pull another text out from here, and they pull another one out from here, and they put them together, and they say, there's proof. And it may be that simple, but often when you look at the text in the context in which they're written, they don't have anything to do with what the person is trying to prove from the text. I was reading a book in college, and the author said it was a book on situation ethics, which was the belief that you cannot determine ahead of time whether something is right or wrong. It's simply the situation itself that determines whether it's right or wrong. And there's some validity to that. If I were to take a knife and slash you with it, that'd be wrong. I would go to jail. But if a surgeon does it in an operation for medical reasons, it's valid. So this author said, even Paul says, let us do evil that good may occur. And I thought, what? Paul says that? Is that in the Bible? Is it in the Bible? It is. But in the context, Paul says, we do not say as some people accuse us of saying, let us do evil that good may occur. Now, I then lost all respect for that author because he was either careless in his quotes or he had quoted it intentionally backwards just to try to make his point. So sometimes we can take a single verse out of the Bible and discuss that because it's a complete thought. For instance, the book of Proverbs is sayings of Solomon, and it may simply be one verse, one little sentence that is a complete thought, and we can discuss that. Sometimes we have to discuss things in a whole chapter. For instance, each chapter in the Psalms is a single poem, and a poem needs to be discussed in whole because a person writes it for a specific reason. You can't simply pull a verse out of a poem and say, there's the truth, because poetry is much more artistic than prose, and the poet may have been using a certain phrase for a different purpose than what we tend to think. Sometimes you have to understand, you have to read the whole book in order to understand what the author is really trying to intend. So we need to observe those cautions, I think, whenever we read the Bible. Now, in Isaiah is talking about, throughout the book, in one sense, Israel or Jacob, my servant, but he also talks about a servant that isn't named. It's a nameless servant, the servant. And through reading the whole book and comparing these different uses, we can determine that there's actually two servants in the book of Isaiah. One servant is Israel or Jacob, which is really referring to the nation of Israel. And the other servant is really a way of referring to the Messiah. So we need to make sure that we make the distinction, that we don't try to take the nation of Israel and apply that to the Messiah, or apply the references to the Messiah to the nation of Israel. There's two complete uses there. Now, it says on the bottom of Sunday's lesson here, do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be afraid, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. I will help you. I will uphold you with my victorious right hand. Here and in the following verses, one of the basic roles of Israel is to trust the true God to save them. What do we call that today? Yeah, that's basically it. Salvation by faith. Some people believe that in the Bible, in the Old Testament, you have salvation by works, and in the New Testament, you have salvation by faith. So we don't really want to spend a whole lot of time today reading the Old Testament, because if we do, we will be pursuing salvation through the wrong methods. So we should spend all of our time just in the New Testament, because it's only in the New Testament that we find salvation by faith. But that's not true. Salvation has always been through the same method, which is faith in God. And so when God says here, do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be afraid, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. I will help you. I will uphold you with my virtuous right hand. God is basically expressing the concepts of salvation by faith. Trust in me, God says. Let me save you. And we can show that throughout the Bible in various places. So let us not get into the trap of separating the Bible into two halves, one part for the Jewish nation, one part for the Gentile nations. Now, did the Jews always understand that salvation was by faith? And did they always practice that? No. The same way it can be said today. Do we always practice salvation by faith, or do we sometimes stumble into the false idea of thinking that there's things that we have to do in order for God to save us? There's some hoops we have to jump through in order for God to save us. There are a lot of Protestant people that believe that a person cannot be saved unless they've been baptized. They believe that there is something in the process of baptism, however they do it, that saves people. Instead of the correct understanding, which I think we have, is that it's simply an outward expression of an inward decision that we have made toward God. So now in Monday's lesson, we get to this role of the Messiah servant, an individual, a person. And this is, I think, a little bit difficult for us, because how many of us have been a servant in the biblical sense? How many of us have been a master of servants in the biblical sense, where we have our own servants and they call us master? So we don't experience this master-servant relationship like people in the Bible did. What's the closest comparison that we can probably make to it today? Employment. So we have an employee, and if there's an employee, there is also an employer. And often the employer hires bosses to run the employees for him. It's not often that people actually work for the owner. Now, there's a couple different types of employees, and if you've ever worked, you know this yourself. There's the employee that always waits to be told what to do. So they'll do a task, and then they're just standing around until the boss comes and tells them something else to do. What's the other kind of employee? The better kind of employee. The kind of employee that you would actually want to hire. What do? They take initiative. They take initiative. They intuitively know what needs to be done, and they go do it.
is likely because the employer empowered them.
It can have a lot to do with with the boss. Some bosses want to have their fingers in everything. And so if their employees go ahead and do something on their own, that gives credit to those employees, right? And some bosses don't want employees to have credit. They want all the credit for themselves. So they don't empower the people under them to do it. That's true.
In some cases, however, they are. Just because maybe the Lord told them to do something that was not under their, I don't know the word for that, but they do it and they don't expect anything in return in that. And
Yeah.
so they don't really say anything, but at least it was done.
Yeah.
Selfless service.
Selfless service.
Selfless service.
Yes. Now, which kind of, and we're not talking about the bosses today. There is a role in the Bible for bosses, and there's a role in the world today for bosses, and there's a role in the church, I suppose, for bosses. If we got to understand that correctly, but we're really not talking about that today. We're talking about the servant. Which kind of these servants? The one who waits to be told for whatever reason, and who then goes faithfully and does whatever they're told, but then stops and waits to be told again. Or the servant who goes ahead and works, doing what the boss wants done, or at least doing what he understands the boss wants done. Which one of these would the Bible call the faithful servant? The second one. The one who knows what the boss wants and then who goes ahead and does it. Now, how most of us are not the bosses. Most of us may be a boss to somebody, but we also have our own boss. Very few people are top boss where they're not answerable to anybody. How does a person, how does an employee learn what their job is?
Job description, on the job training.
Okay, there's a job description that tells you what you're supposed to do. There's training that you go through usually in the first few days of your employment. Often the company will set their new employees down and tell them the history of the company and give them an idea of what the roles and expectations of everybody in the company is, and what they're really trying to accomplish, to get them all on the same page. And then we'll be on the job training. How else do you learn what your boss wants you to do? A mission statement, yeah. That tells you, what is really important here. And in a company where what is really important is to make the sale and make money for the employer, or is what really is important to them customer service? The idea that if you treat the customer right, they'll come back. And if they'll come back, every time they come back is an opportunity for more sales. So whatever the mission statement is. How else do you learn what your boss wants you to do?
Follow the example.
Follow his example, right? You know, if you really want to ingratiate yourself to your boss, and you've noticed that every day at 10 o'clock he gets up and goes across the street to the bakery and gets himself a donut and a cup of coffee. And so you do it beforehand and bring it to him. So he doesn't have to. Now, maybe he wants the walk, you know. Well, there is. I use the word ingratiate, but, you know, we could say suck up too. But, I mean, you know, if it's done in the right way, you know, it can be, otherwise, actually, you can come to the point where he expects it every day. If you have that kind of boss, you know, you don't want to do that. But learning from the example of the boss himself. You know, I've seen bosses who were hands-on bosses. I was working in a factory once, cleaning in the factory, and my boss was actually my boss's boss. Came in, and it was about 4 o'clock, and I worked till 5 in that time. And he came up to me, and he says, "You got about an hour. I don't have anything to do. What can I do for you?" Well, what do you mean? Well, he said, well, what do you need help cleaning with? Well, I haven't got to that room yet over there. I'll take care of it. And he went and he cleaned that room, which gave me an opportunity to do something else. Well, I thought, whoa, that's strange. But I learned from that. You know, when you have a boss who is willing to do things himself, doesn't that make you more willing? You know, I've told you about the Indian sewer before. The principal of the school, who instead of punishing the students by making them empty the sewers by hand, the latrines or whatever they were, took the duty upon himself to do it. And all of his teachers says, you can't do that. They won't respect you. If you do that low, you know, India has castes. So certain people don't do certain tasks like that. But he wasn't Indian. He was Australian. And he said, nope, that's what I'm going to do. And he changed the complete climate of the school. They were, he chose people who were good to help him do that so that he could then pay them extra money. And the students' behavior improved because they wanted to be chosen for that so they could get extra money. So your boss's example, remember that one, because we're going to come back to it. How else do you learn to be a servant?
By doing it.
That's okay. By watching what he does.
Okay. By example again. By doing, of course, because you always think you know how to do something until you start trying to do it, and then you find out, well, maybe I really didn't know how to do it, or the way I knew how to do it wasn't the best way to do it. How else?
Maybe kind of like you're saying, like You should probably humble yourself a little bit and not walk in the job thinking you know everything right off the bat. And then, in other words, that allows you to take more in and I guess. learn.
So an attitude on the part of the servant of willingness to learn,
Right. Willingness to learn that.
willingness to do whatever the job is.
You watch the other employees.
You can learn from your fellow employees how they do it. It's another power of example. I wrote down listen to instructions. So we learn by listening. I'm not even sure I can read what I wrote down there. And it was pretty good when I wrote it down. I observe, ask questions, helps, and so I think if we discuss more, we could. Now, let's talk about ourselves as servants of God. Is that a valid thing to say? Employees of God? People who are working for God? What kind of a servant of his are we going to be? Are we going to be the person who stands around and says, well, yeah, he hasn't told me to do that yet. I haven't been told.
What about working with God? Does that have to be for God? Can it also be with God?
Well, I think all these things that we've discussed imply that, yes. That the boss doesn't simply stand around and expect everybody to do, but the boss gets involved. He works with the employees to help the employees accomplish their tasks, because when they succeed, he succeeds. So all of these things that we have talked about are applicable, I think, to our relationship with God. We learn how to be servants of God by observing his example. We learn how to be servants of God by doing what he's asked. We learn to be servants of God by listening to his instructions. We learn to be servants of God by observing how other of his servants go about their tasks for him. We learn to be servants of God by all of these other ways that we've discussed. There are those who want to pretend that you can be a faithful servant, or I'm going to say a true Christian, without doing anything. Just have faith. Just believe. Now, isn't that what we said? Salvation by faith? Why does a person become a faithful employee who works for the good of their company or the good of their employer? Why does somebody do that?
Because they believe in what they're doing.
Can you produce that type of employee with money? If I give enough money, can I make a person into a faithful employee?
No, not necessarily.
What happens when you give somebody a pay raise? What happens 12 months later? They want more. And if you don't give them more, what do? They become a disgruntled employee. Well, obviously, there's a limit to how much money you can give somebody. You know, So I found that out myself as a student, where as a kid, you can motivate a little kid pretty well with a quarter for a while. And then it's got to be paper. And then $1 isn't enough. It's got to be more. Ultimately, motivation that comes from external sources fail to motivate you. So when I was a senior in college and I go on all these years wanting to get A's and A's and A's and A's, and I was looking at graduating in a few months, and I had a B+ going, and I could do this assignment and get an A, or I could just skip the assignment. I skipped it. I took the B+. I didn't care any longer about A's. Didn't make any sense to me any longer, because I knew I'm going to graduate and nobody's going to give me A, B, C's, and D's any longer. So if you're looking for external motivation to be a Christian, all of that external motivation eventually will not be enough. You have to have internal reasons. You have to buy in to the company's mission statement. And that's what God asks us to do. Buy into Him. Now, when you do that, are you going to be a good servant or a lazy servant? You're going to be a good servant. You're going to be a good employee. You're going to be a good Christian. You're going to ask God what He wants you to do. And then you're going to rely on Him for the power to do what He's asking you to do. Now, that's the employer's responsibility, right? To give you the tools you need to succeed. You know, if you got a job for UPS and you came and they said, you're going to be a driver for us, and you showed up and they said, well, where's your truck? Well, I don't got a truck. Well, how do you expect to deliver the boxes? Well, I thought you were going to give me a truck. UPS van, right? Huh? No, you have to apply. No, you're not going to work for those. An employer's responsibility is to give you the tools you need to succeed. Well, that's God's responsibility in our relationship with us, is to give us the tools that we need in order to succeed. That's called salvation by faith in Him. Now, we still do, but we don't do to become the good employee. We do because we are a good employee. Now, to kind of make this idea of a Persian Messiah, the concept that King Cyrus was kind of a Messiah. And it's kind of interesting because King Cyrus did overcome Babylon, and when he conquered Babylon, he freed the Jews. Now we look at other pagan kings who God used in the Bible. Who are some of them? And who were they associated with? Who are some of the non-Jewish kings that God used in the Bible, and who were they associated with?
Nebuchadnezzar?
You have Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. He eventually, apparently, became a believer in God, but he certainly didn't start out as that. Who was he associated with? Daniel, a prophet of God. Okay, who are some of the other kings who God used?
Caesar of Rome. That's a king.
Caesar, okay. How did... There are various Caesars. There's Augustus, there's Julius, there's... And God did use Augustus Caesar to bring about this census of the Roman Empire, and various things. But I don't know that the Bible specifically shows those kings being used by God.
Cyrus
Huh?
the Great.
There's Cyrus. I wanted him to be last. But I was thinking also of Pharaoh. Who's Pharaoh associated with? Joseph, a man of God. There was Darius, a sub-king to Cyrus, also associated with Daniel at the end of Daniel's life.
Belshazzar.
There's Belshazzar, who was associated with Daniel. And then there was Xerxes, associated with Esther. Who's associated with Cyrus?
Daniel.
What prophet or man of God or woman of God is associated with Cyrus? Nobody. There isn't a single reference to any human representative of God that was associated with Cyrus, and yet God used Cyrus. And I think that's very important. God often will use his people to help bring about his will through a king, like those other examples we have. But God, if God doesn't have a person to use, he still has his angels. And the Bible does depict, doesn't it? Does depict one of the angels spending a month or something like that trying to come to Cyrus. I think it's Cyrus. So it's important that we understand the power of God. Now, Isaiah lived basically 150 or more years before Cyrus captured Babylon. And he predicts that a man named Cyrus would capture Babylon. What are the chances of that happening? What are the chances that I could predict something 150 years in the future? It's close to zero.
Unless you're a man of God,
That's probably 100%.
God can predict the future. That doesn't mean the future is God knows what the future is going to be. So in that sense, he can predict the future. It doesn't mean he's causing everything to happen. So here we have an example of God knowing the future 150 years ahead of time. Now, not only that, but we have the future explained through the statue of King Nebuchadnezzar. And Daniel could have told Nebuchadnezzar, "You are the head of gold." That wasn't a hard thing to figure out. But could he have also predicted, which he did, that the next kingdom was Persia and the next kingdom was Greece? Greece at that time wasn't anybody important. So we have that with God predicting the future. Why is it important for us to understand and believe that God knows the future ahead of time?
He's powerful. He's omnipotent God.
It shows his control, shows the omnipotence of him, the omnipresence of him, and what's the third omni? The omniscient nature of him. So God is always present, God is all powerful, and he is all knowing. So some people try to pretend that they know best. So in the past, the Father was an omniscient person who always knew what was best, which of course wasn't true.
What was the name of the television show?
Father knows best. Whenever we apply the characteristics of God to humans, we're fall short. Only God is God. Only God is omnipresent. Only God is all powerful. Only God is all knowing. The rest of us stumble around, do the best we can. So it also shows us that when God makes a promise for the future, that he is capable of bringing that about. And that's very important for us because often we don't see the promises as possibilities in the present. Sometimes the present seems hopeless, but God says to still have hope. Well, what sense does that make? If the present is hopeless, you might as well give up. But God says, I see into the future, and your future, no matter what's going on today, is bright. What is our future? For every single one of us, if we choose, what is our future?
Eternity.
Eternal life, eternity. That speaks to heaven.
And we know that because of the way he's worked in the past.
And we can be assured of that because of how he has proved it in the past. When? We're impatient. We always know when. When is this world going to end? When is Jesus going to come?
In his time. In his time.
Does that mean soon, as we understand soon to be?
Yes. If we allow.
He says soon.
Does he?
He said soon.
Does he?
But does that soon, his soon the same as our soon?
Does he say soon?
Quickly.
No.
He says quickly. And quickly is not referring to the timing of his coming. It's referring to the manner in which his coming will be. When he comes, it's going to be quick. It's going to be a long, drawn out a thing where astronomers view this cloud 20 light years away. And they're able to measure its progress, so they're able to predict when it's going to come. So you got 20 years to get ready. No, there's a cloud that just shows up and it rapidly expands to encircle the whole world quickly. But we don't know when. In his time, he will come. And we can have the assurance of that. Does that mean it will be soon, as I understand soon to be? Now, that's always been the Christian hope, but it's never been the Christian reality. Yet. It may be. We don't know when. As far as fulfillment of Bible prophecy is concerned, he could come tomorrow. As far as I see the Bible prophecy, the major prophecies in the Bible, they've been fulfilled. Anything that needs to happen before can happen very rapidly. So, a couple things we get from this lesson. I think one is understanding the role of Jesus as a servant, which then becomes the model for us as servants of his. And another thing would be to understand that God's foreknowledge can give us assurance that he can accurately read the future. And so sometimes we see things differently than God sees them. Some people doubt themselves all the time, and they doubt that God loves them, and they doubt their ability to live a Christian life. And God tells them, I believe in you. I don't doubt you. I give you all the strength I have, and you can do it. And so we need to believe God in the times when we are doubting. Believe the promises that he has given us, because he sees the future, and we often don't even see the present accurately. We think we do, but often we don't even accurately understand what is going on right now.